For those of you I do not know yet, I'm Vanessa Costanzo, and this is how we set out to become better problem solvers. So if you are looking for WIM session, that is a different room. A little bit about me. I am based in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm the VP of Operations for NaviQ. Madison has been my home. It was where I was born and have grown up on and off throughout my life. If you ever find yourself in the Madison area, I would love to show you some of my favorite restaurants and parks and things to do. So reach out if you're ever in Madison. Ideally in the summer. It is very cold right now and I wouldn't recommend it. So I have grown up around the FileMaker and Claris communities as well as our business. My dad and mom started our company in 1994, and I'll get into that a little bit in a little while. But we were just reminiscing last night how in 2001, DevCon was at the Disney Resort in Orlando. That was my first DevCon, although I spent 98% of the time in the pool or trying to go to Disney, hanging out with my brother. But I have been very fortunate to literally grow up around this community and surrounded by this community, and can't speak enough to how important that's been in kind of my career development, but also for our company as well. I was the previous lead facilitator for WIT-FM, Women Innovating Together. If you have not heard of them, please check out their booth and go give them some of your time before you head out today. So I've been with NaviQ, or formerly Recruiting Pro Software, since it was founded in 1994 in a variety of different roles, and have been there in part-time capacity doing tech support, full-time capacity doing business development, and now in my role of VP of Operations. So I've seen a lot of different sides of the business, as well as had a lot of different roles and experiences kind of within the Claris community. So when I came back to NaviQ in 2016, we really started to focus on process. And that is really where kind of this process of defining our process and how are we better problem solvers, how can we be better as a team started. And that's when we designed our NaviQ P2S platform, so our problem to solution platform for our clients, which is primarily what we'll be talking about today. As we are a family business, we have been involved in the Wisconsin Family Business Center since 2017, which has also been an incredible resource for us. And I am now on their advisory board. So if you are involved in a family business or thinking about just succession within your own company, I would love to nerd out and talk with you about that. It's something I'm really passionate about. Prior to coming back to NaviQ in 2016, I did an MBA at Boston University and a Master's of Science in Information Systems. So that's a lot of where my process, workflow, systematizing brain was fueled, and that's really where I became very passionate about this. The program was specific to the crossover between business and technology and how they can work together and how we can speak both languages, which has been really beneficial, not only for us internally, but to be able to take that to our clients as well. And lastly, whether it is planning reunions with my friends, family vacations, trips, or dinner parties, I love a list. So I think you'll catch on to that throughout this presentation, as far as just how I feel about process and lists and having things be repeatable and organized. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll really talk about kind of where this started and where we started with our unprocessed process, as I call it, and how that kind of evolved into short intro meetings, a spec call, and maybe a one-page outline of what a project was going to be. And then we'll dive a little bit into the first couple iterations of how we defined our actual process. And then how that focused on kind of those large projects, and then how we transitioned into creating that for smaller projects as well. We'll kind of jump into some of the tools that we've created to assist us with this. Kind of that concept of eating our own dog food, and we're preaching these things to our clients. How are we going to do them ourselves? And then we'll jump into a little bit on the data collection side, and then extending this concept and methodology to kind of all parts of operations and how you run your business and interact with your clients. So where we started. So I call it our unprocessed process. The company started in 1994 as Recruiting Pro Software, which was a SaaS vertical market solution for collegiate athletic programs. We had higher end packages where they could add some customization, but it was still selling a product. About 14 years ago, we started transitioning into doing more custom development. And we knew that would be a very different sales process. And that was really what started this process the first time, was how are we going to do this? We know this is going to be different. We're not going to a coaches convention to sit at a booth and sell to people and sell them our product. We need to figure out what the custom solution is for our clients now. So we were meeting with potential clients. They would tell us their problem. We'd have maybe a 30-minute to 2-hour meeting, depending on the person. And in some cases, what they wanted their solution to be of, okay, this is what I want. I don't want to get into my problems. I want to tell you what I want. And so we started trying to figure out like better ways to get to that end goal, that end result. We had a former coach who came to us and said, I need Recruiting Pro for my sales team. We said, okay, well, what parts of it? What is it? It's asking those questions to get into, okay, why? What do you actually need? Do you need a call log? Do you need tracking within your staff to figure out who's assigned to which clients? So we would then kind of put together an estimate, a very limited specification document, if any, at some point, and then sign a contract and move into development. And that worked. There were some growing pains. We realized that we didn't always know what we were getting into when we got into a project, and that things would come up. So we started talking about, okay, what can we do better? And as I said, we didn't really have a process. We would try and ask the right questions or probing questions, but sometimes it just wouldn't get to that root cause. As a side note, Sarah is doing a session across the hall on Curiosity Unleashed, Mastering the Art of Asking, Listening, and Innovating, which I will highly recommend to anyone as far as kind of being key to this process and asking the right questions and figuring out how to do that better. I'm sure she is doing a wonderful job. So maybe the owner of the business thinks the issue is it's their invoicing time. They're not getting invoices out fast enough, so they're not getting paid fast enough. And so they're really focused on the generation and the sending of the invoice. But really, if you keep asking why, or keep talking to maybe other people that are boots on the ground, involved in the process, other stakeholders, you realize that they aren't invoicing in a timely manner because their orders are being manually written. Then they're being scanned. Then they're being sent to someone in project management. Then they're being entered into a system, and then they're being invoiced. And so the problem isn't really that they're not generating and sending the invoices. The problem is that they don't have a great way to collect and transmit this data so that it can be invoiced. So really figuring out, okay, how do we get to those root cause issues? We don't want the symptoms. The symptoms are important, but how do we make the actual diagnosis and a correct diagnosis? So we started going back to the drawing board of, okay, how do we get to these things in this time that we're using in these discovery calls? And it was really difficult to dig into that and to problem solve and to talk to multiple people when you didn't have time. And so we really struggled with that dichotomy of wanting to dig deep, but not giving away our most valuable resource, which is our time, for free. So because we didn't have a process that we could kind of repeat and get to these pain points, or even a robust checklist, it wasn't replicable. So that led to kind of our process Recruiting Pro version 1. So this initial visual and outlining of our process was really inspired by a talk at a mini conference I believe Molly Connolly put on in Chicago, which led us to really finalize and formalize this first iteration. So as you can see, this was back when we were Recruiting Pro, and nothing on here is really that earth-shattering. To anyone that's familiar with a development cycle, development process, it makes sense. You understand what those things are, and you probably have some form of that in your process as well. But we determined that the way to get that time to dig deep without hurting our bottom line was to charge clients for it. So the biggest thing that came out of our first version of our process was splitting out that discovery and scope. So we would have someone sign a letter of engagement that started our discovery process, and at the end of scope, we would give them a project specification document. And it really turned out that it was kind of like a dating period. We wanted it to be good for both people. We wanted this to be a long-term relationship. We wanted to enjoy working with our clients, and we wanted our clients to enjoy working with us. And it was a great way to kind of test that out and make sure we were a good fit and we were compatible before saying, okay, let's embark on a 3-year development project. You had that shorter time period to be like, okay, yeah, you work really well. You get your things in on time. You're just a joy to talk to on a daily basis. Let's move forward. So after the spec doc, they could continue and we would write a contract for development. They could take it to someone else and have them develop it, or they could do it in-house or say, this is great information, but we're not going to proceed at this time. So we actually had a lot of success with this process at first. The dating period, discovery and scope really resonated with clients. It was a much lower investment and kind of that get your foot in the door, and by the time you're done with discovery and scope, the door's wide open to continue that relationship. So we still envision this as more of a linear process at this point. We would build something, we would deliver it, and be done. It was really geared towards more initial primary large projects. And also kind of at the time when we were first starting to do custom development, we thought we would build a project, we would deliver it to the client, and it was great working with you and nice to know you. But what we learned throughout this process was that we would build the project, we would deliver it, and maybe 3 months later, they would come back and say, well, actually, we did that for sales. Can we do something for invoicing? Or we did that for marketing. Can we work with our inventory management? And so these became not just linear interactions, but this relationship and this long-term process. Does anyone notice a very glaringly missing item that is not on this screen? We didn't either at the time, obviously, but support. So what happens after this is delivered? And making sure that we're really including that in our development process. That was one of the big things that we realized we did not account for in that first iteration. So how are we doing this? We were using mostly Excel and Word document templates for data collection from the client for their workflows and features. And it was an improvement from obviously our no process, but definitely wasn't where we wanted to end up and where we wanted to go. We felt it could be better and we wanted to be better for our clients. There were still pain points at this time. And we were trying to apply the concepts we use with our clients to ourselves and our process of asking, okay, why are you doing it this way? Why are you sending an Excel document? Why are you doing things in this manner? Why are you doing things in the order you're doing them? So that led us to our NaviQ P2S platform. So knowing that we could make it even better was a huge motivation for kind of this second version. This was also right around the time when we were going through our rename and rebrand with the Creative Company, which is a marketing and PR agency in Madison. So we worked with the Creative Company to design and put together our P2S platform in this visual. So they helped us kind of think through the visual representation and what was really important about our process and what we were really trying to help our clients with throughout this process. The biggest things that we wanted to make sure we had changed was that this was no longer linear. We weren't doing development, review, launch, done. That it was a process. We were doing development, review, testing, changes. We would launch that, then go back into development, review, testing, changes, launch that, and go back. So that was really important that we wanted to capture, and I think that's a really important part of the process. and that it was iterative. This was something that was going around in circles before it came out. We wanted to make sure that this could apply to smaller projects. So even now, when we're in a 2 to 3 week sprint, we're still using these same steps as we're going through that. We're doing our development, we're doing our internal testing, we're doing review, client testing, making any changes, pushing to production. And so we wanted to make sure that this was applicable regardless of the size of the project. So it really kind of changed how we looked at our business and wanted to make sure that these long-term relationships that we had seen come to fruition in the initial process was captured here. So it included focusing on the words we were using for the process. As you can see, we changed delivery to launch because we didn't want to indicate that we were just giving you something and this was done, but we wanted that excitement of we're going to launch this and it's going to go live and you're going to get to use it. We also added in support. So addressing what happens after launch. Like we said, fostering those long-term relationships are what's really important. And in order to do that, you have to have that continual touch point and training so that people feel comfortable. We also added in our NaviQ tracker. So it was no longer a client portal, which previously had really been focused on budget and where we were at from a budget standpoint. But we'll talk about the NaviQ tracker in a few slides. And then lastly, the project specification document was now the NaviQ game plan, which for the most part, there weren't any major changes with that, but it was a nod to our previous life in kind of the athletic space and having that game plan. And so in all, it's a project specification document. So another change that came around this time was that isn't depicted here is that we moved to a multi-server environment. So all of our projects have they're on a development server that our team has access to, a testing server that the client has access to, and a production server that the client has access to as well. So this has really helped as we go through these different pieces to make sure that the client has a good environment for testing that's going to be similar to what they're going to see. It's their data. They know what it looks like. They can have that freedom to poke around and make mistakes and find bugs and do all these things without it being in their live system. So that was kind of something that came about when we really wanted to get into this process. And as I mentioned earlier, another change we made coming from the first version was that we moved our internal testing into our development process. So that's done kind of under that development piece. These are in the slides that I believe are posted. If not, will be posted later today, just kind of diving into what each of those steps really is. And so this kind of is just the words for you to have for your notes of what we just discussed. So I want to get into our discovery portal a little bit. And because we have time, toggle works here. Awesome. So like I mentioned, we had previously used Word and Excel templates for our discovery. So that was great for a discovery that had maybe a handful of people. You have a smaller company with 2 or 3 key stakeholders that were going to be involved in the process. It was great for me because we could copy and paste it right into our spec doc and it was all formatted and ready to go. But we were about to embark on a discovery with a client that was fully distributed, had over 25 people that were going to be involved in the discovery process, and that was about to start in, I believe, 2 weeks. And we said, Word and Excel documents are not going to work. Why aren't we using the tools that we already use, that we already love, and that we already know how to create things in? So we've been using FM Better Forms for a while. So we spun up a simple discovery portal in order to do this with the client. So it was a way to expose clients to some of the technologies that we work with and how we do things. One of the things that was really important was even something as little as showing them kind of how things work relationally. So they entered all of their features into the feature section of the project, and being able to tie a feature directly to a workflow to say, okay, we have Vanessa's first test feature. What are all of the workflows that are involved with that? What are all the things that are related to it? They could assign their different staff members. So from an ownership standpoint, that was really important with this bigger project. And ultimately, it allowed us to really dive in deeper. So we typically go in and we have them give their ideal workflow steps, but also information about who does it, how frequent, but also what their current step is. And what was really interesting about this piece with so many people, and what was really powerful, was that we would have people put in their desired workflow, their current workflow, and maybe Chris would come and he would comment and say, well, that's not how I do it. First, I generate the PDF, and then I add this attachment, and then I send it to the client. Where someone else I was generating it from Word and sending it. So having this platform where they could all come and they could add their comments, we could add comments and say, hey, we don't understand this, or can you please add the file that you're talking about? Can you please upload your report? Having this central location was really key and was a huge step forward in just the quality of information that we were able to get about this client, their workflows, and their process. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Like, I have a question about this. This looks awesome.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So do you do it like in addition to reviewing the user stories? Or does it happen before the conversation or after the conversation? Can you please talk more about it?
Yeah, so we initially will have kind of like an intro meeting. We will then, depends on the client. We will usually then say, okay, let's talk about some initial features, functions, start distilling down, like, is this going to be more of a sales tool? Is this going to be more of an operations tool? Is this going to be a registration site? Kind of starting to drill in on what their biggest pain points are, and what we're ultimately going to be trying to solve. Then we'll come into the discovery portal. So once they sign that letter of engagement, we're then setting up the discovery portal. There are typically, I would say, at least 5 to 6 workflows that we can identify externally after those initial meetings to be like, okay, we're going to just prime the pump for you a little bit. Like, we know a main feature is that it has to have calendaring. So we enter in that feature. So there are a few things in there to give them some ideas. And then we've also developed documentation that we have for them that defines what different roles can do within the discovery portal. So they can have an admin that they can add people and they can assign people to different projects. But then they can have a user who cannot add people to projects, can only go in and edit workflows that they're assigned to. So we have all of that documented out in a PDF that they get along with their instructions to log in for the first time. So we're trying to be as proactive as possible at answering kind of any of the questions that the end users and stakeholders are going to have throughout the process. But yeah, they jump into the discovery portal pretty quickly after we start discovery. Because what we found, and this is something that changed once we were in the process, was that if we went and had a discovery meeting with, say, the project management group, and we went in before they had gone and done their workflows, we would meet with them and we wouldn't understand the basics of their processes. We wouldn't understand the 3 tools they're using to do the same thing. And so that meeting would just be spent asking these questions that it's like one of those, this meeting should have been an email kind of thing, but not an email. We use the discovery portal. So we try and gather as much of that information first so that when we're meeting with them, we're asking deep questions. We are getting at okay, these 3 groups within your company are using 4 different tools to do the same thing. Let's talk about why. And trying to connect those dots. For example, we have a client, they are an early childhood education curriculum company. They host events, they have products, product lines, and then they have an online store where they sell those products as well. They weren't making the connection between with a relational database that they could go and say, oh, this event is always going to be assigned to these 3 curricula. That was like mind blowing to them to be like, all I have to do is pull up this event and it lists all the curricula and all of the people. And so if we didn't know how the products related to the events, which related to the registrations, we would have never been able to go in and have some of those discussions. But because we understand more of their business and what they do, our discovery meetings have been, I would say, infinitely more productive. And we're solving actual problems and pain points in them. Does that answer your question? Probably too much.
That's exactly what I needed, I guess.
Any other questions? Okay. So I apologize if I repeat myself here, but I think I remember where I left off. So from a workflow and feature standpoint, like I mentioned, our workflows and our features are tied to different projects. Some clients will have 3 different projects. They'll have a project for their finance group because they don't want everyone in the company seeing all the finance workflows and features. They'll have an ops project. However, we kind of break that up in the initial discovery. They'll be able to come through and do that. Another really cool thing that we added after we got the initial Better Forms built, we realized that this was also a great way to just learn more about our clients. And our big thing is that we're not coming in and selling them a product. We're trying to solve their problems. We're trying to solve their pain points. And the more information we can gather and understand them and their processes and their pain points, the better we're going to be at doing that. So we started just having some primary job responsibilities that they can then tag to different software tools they're using, different workflows they're using. So we could see that in, say, workflow send an email, there was 4 different software tools being used. And people were using it for 6 different job responsibilities. So also kind of getting the information about what are the most critical pieces to solve. So we gathered some user information about them and their job, some tech environment information, and gave them the ability to do a software evaluation, and then kind of a free space to say, okay, this is your place to dream. What are the things that you want? Do you know of tools within your industry or that other people you know are using that you think could be helpful? Sometimes it's hard for people to go to their managers and say, hey, I really think we need this. And so it allows them a space to provide us that information. And then we could be the ones to go to their management team and say, hey, there's a really cool tool for your space. Like, have you thought about using this? Someone on your team has done some research. We've vetted it. And it gives them just another place to have an opinion, have that voice and be heard. So the discovery portal was really just a better way for us to do our data acquisition in that discovery process. The technology audit was a way for us to really synthesize the information they were getting across their organization. For that particular client, we put a lot of their software evals into Tableau to visually show. I believe they had 78 different tools that they were using on a regular basis. And I think the average rating was somewhere in a 2.9 to 3.3. So people were using a lot of tools they didn't love, and they were using them really frequently. And so having that visual to go and show a management team and a board of directors to sell them on a project was just really impactful and really powerful. It made our job a lot easier. So I'm going to switch back. Any other questions on Discovery Portal before I switch back to slides? Okay. So so then kind of on the back end, so after they were done with that process, we would generate a report, we would have our discovery meetings, and we would sit down with them and say, okay, here are what we think are the 3 main problems that you are facing. Maybe they're the same as the ones they came with. Typically, we haven't seen that. I would say usually they get maybe 1, maybe 2 of them spot on. But then there are underlying issues that they just haven't identified or haven't had the vocabulary or the information to support. So we'll take those to our discovery meetings and we'll meet with the client and kind of dive deep into our questions. And then here, so this is kind of our process that we show them to give them an idea of what they're getting into. As I mentioned before on the discovery portal documentation, a big push and a big change for us has been more documentation. It's just another method and way to be able to communicate with the client and make sure that everyone is on the same page. So this was also another thing that we didn't expect, was we thought this would be very linear, just kind of how our Word documents had been. They would enter their information, they would submit it, we would review it, we would talk about it in a discovery meeting, and we would give them a spec doc. And that was, again, not the case. You would have thought we might have learned, but we didn't. So what really happened was they would enter they would enter their information into the discovery portal. They would save it and submit it to us. So if they submitted it, then it would come to us and ready for review. If they weren't ready, they could kind of hold it in that in progress state for as long as they wanted. Once we got to review it, they could still comment, which was really important. And we still wanted to be able to edit it. So once we went in and said, okay, we're reviewing it, that locked it down. So they couldn't make any more changes. Then we would say, okay, this isn't clear. I don't understand this. We need more information. So then we could send it kind of in that loop, send it back to the client. And they could go into, okay, I'm going to give them the information they've asked for. I'm going to edit this, and then kind of back through the cycle until we don't have any more questions, hopefully, and until we get into development. And then we kind of put that in that completed stage. And that's like where I said those discovery meetings came in. So we would generate the report and say, these are the 6 workflows we're going to talk about in our meeting today. So everybody could, again, be on the same page, all be at the same starting place when we got into that room, and all have the same information. I think that was one of the things that was really powerful, was having that information shared and available to everyone. And then at that point, we would initiate scope once we were done with our discovery phase, and then it would be finalized. So we found that the feature, I think, that was most used, that we were shocked, was the comments. We had, I wrote it down and I can't find it. I believe we had like an average of 7 comments per workflow, in addition to just the information that people build upon within the different workflow sections. We had questions. They wanted to add feedback. They wanted to add their input as well. Any questions here? Okay. So that's great, but that's discovery and scope. As you can see, that's only a very small piece of the whole picture of that whole process. So what happens then once you get into development, or even once development has launched and you're in production and they have a new feature request or they find a bug? How do you provide that same level of communication and that same opportunity for information sharing once you've already gotten into kind of the nitty-gritty of it? So once we get into kickoff and we're in our multi-server environment, that's when we have our NaviQ tracker. So previously we had kind of that client portal, which, like I mentioned, was really just about budget. Discovery and scope, we're going to take 20 hours and we're at 14 and we only have 3 to go. But we really wanted it to be more than that. We wanted it to be something that communicated to them and that had information. So in all of our systems, we have a button on the bottom right-hand corner of all of our pages where they can click a support button. This is where we are storing documentation that is applicable to that screen, if there is any, but also where they can enter a feature request or a bug fix. And that goes into our NaviQ tracker, which is essentially just a fancy way to say our ticket system, which is how we manage the rest of the process for all of these items. So on the screen is just a screenshot of a Kanban view that we have for them when we're planning out sprints. But the ticket, if we have time, I can get into showing you guys what we have in the ticket screen or layout. So the clients can see in the Kanban their highest priority tickets. So I believe we show like the top 2 to 3 priorities right on there, and then they can drag and drop into whatever sprint they want that ticket handled in, if they choose. So some clients love to have control over that, as I'm sure you've all experienced. Other clients are like, I don't care, just tell me when it's going to be done and what you need from me. You go ahead and assign. So the nice thing about this interface is that it doesn't matter who's doing it, just that someone is doing it. So we're assigning those to the sprint. They have line of sight, and we're all on the same page when we're planning. So not only do they have line of sight to our timeline and our calendar and what's coming up in our backlog, but also they have line of sight to issues that people are entering in. So maybe I am the head of sales, and I see that 3 of my salespeople have entered different tickets about new features they want that I would have never expected. And maybe it's a time to sit back and say, oh, maybe we need to look at how we're doing our sales process. Everyone's doing things a little bit differently. Like, is it a process? Is it a software? Is it a tool? Or is it just different personalities? And being able to see those all in one place is a great place to kind of start percolating some of those ideas. So the other thing, and probably my favorite part of the ticket file, is that it keeps things out of email. So we've started between the discovery portal and the NaviQ tracker. We're trying to train our clients in essence to put things in a method or in a format that we will see them and that will be most helpful. So instead of maybe I get sent an email of a new feature request, that's a great feature request, but nobody else on our team is copied, and maybe one person on their team is copied, and then it's, oh, well, but Susan also needs to see this. How are we, then you have to do another reply. You have to add that person. You have to make sure everyone's replying all, which can be an issue. And so having them in this external place has been really helpful to keep things out of email, to keep everything centrally located. All of the files or any examples that need to be included for this feature or bug fix are all in one place. And it's extended into how we do our testing. So it's also where we manage our internal testing as well as our client testing. And it's a really easy way for them to come in and say, hey, this is supposed to send when I click the button and nothing happens. Or I click the button and I get this weird screen, here's the screenshot. Immediately it's telling us, okay, you have something to fix before we go into production next week. But it's also just an easier way for them to provide you that information. So when we're talking about kind of managing timeline and development, as I mentioned, this has become really key in how we do our scheduling and manage our time. And it's a great way to communicate that to the client. Just to give you an idea of what those typical kind of sprints in that process looks like. It varies from client to client, kind of on how they like to schedule things and do things, but we'll typically have 2 weeks of development. And then over the weekend, we will go, and that's when we'll do our development and our development testing. We'll go into our testing server over the weekend. On Monday, they tend to have their first testing day. So they'll go through and they'll test all of the tickets, maybe Tuesday if they have a busy week. That gives us Wednesday, Thursday to hopefully fix anything that they found that we didn't. And then it gives them an opportunity to retest so that again and again, we are confirming that this is what we have discussed, this is what we've asked for, and this is is working as expected. Then another big thing that we have added with this process and kind of on that support side is incorporating training. So once we go to production, before we go to production, we're typically doing a training session with anyone that either wants to attend or should attend based on the client, so that they know what is coming before it's going into production. So typically that'll be on like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then once everybody knows what's there and isn't going to come in and see a new button on the screen that they are totally surprised by and have no idea, they'll get to see that in training. So what have we learned? I've thrown a lot out at you. And I think the most important thing is to kind of talk about our takeaways. So I guess my first word of encouragement, word of advice, I guess, depending on where you are in the process, is this isn't something you're going to get right the first time. Going through and putting together this presentation, I'm like, wait, why are we doing it like that? Like maybe we should switch our process a little bit, or why are we using that tool? And so it's going to grow, it's going to evolve, it's going to change, and that's okay. It can still be a process and evolve as long as everyone's on the same page about how the process is working at this point in time. And you're going to learn what works for you and what works for your clients isn't going to be what maybe works for someone else's clients or for their team. Just like we're building custom software, we need custom processes and workflows within our own businesses because everyone is unique and everyone is different. I would say don't be afraid to check in with your clients on your process. When we first kind of got into more iterative of a process, we checked in with one of our clients and they're like, we love how much you guys are getting done, but this is really overwhelming. Like we want you to go fast, but we want it to feel slow. And that was kind of where we were like, okay, maybe we take some extra time and we do more training and we're not pushing to production before we do training. And you're going to learn things, but don't be afraid to ask them because you want it to be mutually beneficial. You want it to work for both of you. Another big thing that I don't think I can say enough is change is hard. Getting people to change is hard. We're in the business of bringing about change for clients. I would like to think it's positive change 99.9% of the time for most of the people that are going through whatever the change is. But it's hard and people are averse to change. And so one of the ways that we've really tried to alleviate this is through communication, documentation, having those discussions of, hey, this is going to be some work on your end. Are you up for it? Is your team up for it? If not, that's okay. This isn't for everyone. This process isn't for everyone. But if that resonates, let's keep talking. And we've had to think about that ourselves. I mean, we had functioned as a company for a very long time with a lot of different processes and a lot of different business workflows. And so for us internally, it was, oh, this is what our clients are feeling when they go through this. And so just give yourself some grace, I guess, is the key there. One of the things we learned was the value in discovery and scope. I can say this because he's in the room and he will tell this story. When I first proposed breaking out discovery and scope and that I wanted to charge clients for this, my boss and father looked at me and said, people aren't going to pay for that. I don't think this is going to work. And I said, okay, well, he goes, but let's try. And I was like, okay. So the value that clients have seen in that process alone, there are people that we've worked with a couple startups where they're like, we don't have the funding right now to do this full project and to do this, but we want to go through discovery and scope to see what this looks like, to think about our business and our process, to evaluate the technology we've already chosen or that we're thinking about. And so they see huge value in just those two pieces just on their own. I would say a lot of businesses could use a little refresher evaluation of their workflows and their processes because many people don't have standardized business rules or like we mentioned, people are doing things in every different way. And so getting everyone on the same page. We're adding value is more than just the development and the code we're writing, but we're adding value to their businesses. And then another, kind of a couple other things we've learned. So being involved with more than one key stakeholder has been a really positive thing. Having a tool that they can use to do that has been a huge catalyst for that. If you can tell someone, I want 5 people on your team involved in this process, but you don't have to worry about it, they're not going to come to you, you will see a huge smile on their face. So, okay, yes, then you can have access to my people. Because getting to that root cause and that kind of diagnosis, instead of just those symptoms and symptom management, is really by getting all the stakeholders involved, the people that are doing the work on a daily basis, and not just the people that are managing the people doing the work on a daily basis. So having the place, the forum, and the experience that they can have those tough conversations of, well, why aren't we doing this? Or maybe the operations group needs to be doing what the sales group is doing, and breaking down those barriers that are kind of there within the organizations already, to get them to a place where they can come to a consensus about business rules, operations, processes. And it's nice for them to have somewhat of a mediator in the room. Their manager isn't the one that's sitting going, why are you 3 doing something different? It can be us, and it takes them out of it a little bit. But again, like I mentioned, this process isn't for everyone. Not all clients are a good fit, and not everyone has the time to do this, and that's okay. Like I mentioned, it really is a dating period. It's, let's make sure this is going to be a good fit for both people moving forward, both organizations moving forward, which has really enabled us to build trust and be seen as an extension of our clients' teams instead of just a contractor or a vendor that they call when their FileMaker system isn't doing what they want it to. Like we just talked about, change is hard. Being consistent in interactions, process, and communication gives people something to expect and to know as they're moving forward. And lastly, figure out what works for you. This is an ongoing process and journey that I don't think ever really finishes. And so be okay coming back and asking how you can improve, whether it's asking yourself or asking your team or clients. And I look forward to hearing any questions anyone has, or experiences people have had with their similar stories or processes. That's it. Any questions? Otherwise, you get
I have
the
questions.
bathrooms before anyone else gets.
Vanessa, so I'm curious if you speak a little more about the client buy-in piece of things. So we work with quite a variety of clients and different tools, right? Asana, Jira, like they all have their own systems for how they want to be managing and communicating with us, Basecamp, whatever, right? How do you convince them to use your tool instead of you use their tool?
That's a really good question. I think we have one client who was hesitant to use the Naviq tracker, the ticket system. And honestly, the way that we handled that was, that's fine. You can continue to email us these things, but we're going to enter them in that system because that is how we do our time tracking. That's how essentially you get billed. It's all tied together. So if you want to email us the information, that's fine. We'll put it in a ticket, but then you're paying for our time to enter this into the ticket from your email. And if you don't have everything in your email that we need, that will be more time as we are trying to go back and forth with you. So we haven't had as much pushback on that. I also think a key part in that is we've already been working with these people for a period of time and have built built up some trust and credibility of, okay, if this is the way that you think we should do this and this is the way you're telling us to do this, we trust you. We trust what you've done so far. So we haven't had a ton of pushback. So that's probably not very helpful, but
No, it is. It's
I think the trust is probably the biggest one of, and the communication up front of, here's the thing, here's how we do things. When we first meet with them, we, in a very, very first introductory meeting on Zoom or in person, we're showing them the P2S platform. We're talking about what that means from a time standpoint on their end, from a process standpoint, from the tools that will be utilized. So we're pretty upfront about it from the get-go. So it's also something that we've communicated to them already. And that this is what it's like to work with us. This is how we do things. Oh, I saw two more hands, I think. Oh, go ahead.
From what I understand, you're billing on time and a materials basis. How many hours do you usually spend on discovery and scoping? And do you also bill for that time based on how much time you spend, or is it a fixed cost?
Great question. So yes, we are time and materials. We are doing discovery and scope as time and materials for a variety of reasons. One is to get them used to that's how it's going to be in every other step and every other process. We don't want that portion of the process to be different and for them to be like, well, why was this one cost and you told me it was going to be, and this is dependent on how much time it takes. And so from a consistency standpoint, as far as estimating that, we use a PERT technique, and I'm blanking on the acronym. I will put it in my notes when I look it up. It's project estimating something time. But what it does is it's a formula that takes, you put in a most likely of what you think the estimate will be. You put in what you think the absolutely worst case most hours would be, and best case least hours. And it's a formula that puts all those together and spits out a number. So we go through and we evaluate how many workflows or features we think this project will be, how many meetings it will take. And we go through line by line of, okay, we're doing a spec, we're doing the project or the game plan, we're doing an ERD, we're doing all the things that are going to go into that project game plan. And we're going through and doing that for each one. So most likely best, worst, and then aggregating all of those together for our estimate. So it really varies. I mean, I would say it tends to be, for the most part, proportional to the size of the eventual and overall project. And also just how long the game plan is. We've had game plans that are 10 pages. We've had game plans that are, I think I have one. I brought the biggest game plan that we have ever done was 428 pages. So it was massive. And so obviously those are very different scales. But that's going to kind of be reflected in the PERT. That answer? Okay.
You mentioned earlier checklists, that you love checklists.
I do love checklists. And so going through our process, and actually, yeah.
I was hoping to see some of that in here, because I love checklists too, so I was just curious.
Yeah.
So,
So a lot of our checklists are kind of built into our processes. It was like my checklist that I used to keep in Basecamp, and it was like, okay, every time I'm checking that these 4 things are done in the discovery portal. So now we've tried to kind of automate that, and that, so like we've taken my checklist and kind of integrated them into the process. So one of the things I did was make sure like all of the comments were done and all of the workflows were entered. Well, now that's automated and they don't go to the status of ready for NavQ until those things are completed. So that's my checklist. All of my checklists that I would keep on sticky notes and in Basecamp have been for the most part incorporated into either the tracker or the discovery portal. But let me see, I think I have a ticket pulled up here. I can kind of show you. Hopefully it's okay that I have this one up. So this is an example of kind of our Naviq tracker and what a ticket looks like. And as you can see down the left-hand side, there are a variety of different sections. A lot of these are where my checklists are being built in. One of which is in testing. So instead of going to Basecamp and saying the testing is done for this week, email the client, we're coming in and we're either saying, if it's our internal testing, this wants still work. So if we're doing internal testing, I'm coming in, I double clicked, and I can either say, oh no, this didn't pass. So Chris gets a notification or Paul gets a notification. Hey, you have to fix something. I put in my notes. Here it's building in kind of that this had already passed. You're already good. Are you sure you want to fail this? It will not, so I won't give Chris a heart attack of why this is testing completed and now coming back. But we've built a lot of that right into the tools that we've built and that we're using. And I would say, especially in testing, that is a big way that we've done it. Any other questions?
Do you use this tool in the development of the tool itself?
Oh, like this is a Claire's FileMaker file.
Is this like continuing to be like developed, the tool itself, or is it just like?
I mean,
It was more of a joke question.
yeah, it is kind of actually. So I have a wish list of, one of our clients is ourselves in the ticket file. So I have my wish list of things I would like done and added and changed.
Cool.
Hint, hint.
Look at you. Oh,
But yes, the tool is useful.
And you have to get CEO approvals for that?
Yeah, unfortunately. I need CEO development. Any other questions? You're kind of getting into the checklist on the development side, especially adding the development notes. So after we push from testing's completed, we're in awaiting deployment. Once it goes to deploy, then we'll come back. We'll see the development notes for anything that's been deployed. So if there was a new table added or things that we want to check in the data structure, or let's make sure that this didn't break from the testing environment and how that email is set up differently than in the production environment, those kinds of things. We have a place where we're keeping all of those notes and we're keeping all of that organized in one place.
How do you track these notes? Like, is this like the developer goes in and then?
Yeah, so if like whoever is in there developing and they're like, okay, once we push this to testing or once we push this to production, we need to check this, they'll come in and add a developer note. And then once it's in that deployed status, then we can go in and make sure that those are all completed. Like if I went in here, there were developer notes and I tried to close this ticket, it would tell me that you have developer notes that you haven't addressed. Are you sure you want to close this ticket? So trying to build those things in wherever we can. Awesome. Well, I think I have 10 seconds. If anyone else has any other questions. I will put really quick. I will put my contact info up because I know we are almost done with Engage, sadly. That's just a link to, I'll put my final slides. I've made a few tweaks. I'll put those at that QR code, but also my contact information. Please reach out if you have any questions or, like I said, want to nerd out on succession or process within your company. I'd love to talk to you.